Now, I want to get some big corn like that, for me to get that big corn.
Hello?
Okay, I'm gonna get some little corn.
I don't know where I was. One of them had the Eastern Band landscape coming. I finally just fell apart. And this one started to like this.
I didn't have time to come here.
Yes.
I got her jewelry, I'm wearing this right now because I'm not gonna kind of do something to the denim for the denim. Do it.
I'm gonna run out there and get that paper for you.
What have you been doing? Anything exciting?
Okay.
What have you been doing? Anything exciting?
Well, I bought me a pen in the gift shop,
Uh-huh.
and the first time my parents
I'm here to thank everyone for coming, and we'll begin with Lisa will be introduced as our speaker in a few minutes. But on your table, I hope that you have copies of the minutes of the last meeting, and we'll just give you a chance to look over those a little bit, and then we'll see if you have questions or anything at a later time. And now we'll have the treasurer's report by Sharon. Sharon, you want to give the treasurer's report?
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't.
Okay.
You can talk. It's been a wild day. Our general account continues to hold $8,083.68. We're spending, but we're still holding. Our CATA grant account, we are depleting that weekly. The ladies have been busy back in the museum, working and spending, so then I get to order and spend the money. And then our CD remains at $62.88.35. And then our building fund, I guess that is 1/4 of our building fund. If we got half of our building fund back in the fall, and then we get half more the next time. Is that right?
I think what we got in the fall is for this entire year.
You think it's, well, but then that's not the whole building.
No, but there'll be other.
So it could be 1/4.
Yeah.
So it's $204,000 and $204,215. I can't even talk about that much money. And as always, our financial reports are available anytime that you want to look at them, or you might have a question about them. Thank you.
Okay, and just to follow up on that, our contractor, who is Buck Clark, I got a message from him today, and he said, we're still waiting on the engineer to finish up with what the city is asking for, to build a site plan of everything. We are constructing the building off-site, and it's close to being finished. So I guess they must do that and bring it here in pieces and set it up on there. That's a big building, but he said it's almost finished. And he said, as soon as we get ready to break ground and run the foundation, then we'll be bringing the building. So once they get started, maybe it'll go quickly. Okay, are there any questions about Sharon's report? Okay, if not, we will file that for review at the end of the fiscal year. Okay, we have some wonderful door prizes for you, and Phyllis is going to do that.
I'm gonna chase Wanda down and have her call it first.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And the ticket ends with 357. Is that yours? Yes.
All right. Choose a number from 1 to 5. That's going to depend, that's going to, I guess the luck of the draw. All right. Yeah. Oh, yeah. And we have the packet to go with it. Ready? Now, and besides that, you get to draw the next ticket. Okay, all right, and the last 3 are 361.
Oh, that's me.
All right. 2 of them, 4 is gone, but there's a 1, 2, 3, and 5.
Yeah.
Do you already have Josie's book?
No, I don't.
I love, she took us on a tour and I'm just fascinated with her writing now. So you'll enjoy that. 360. Okay, there's a 1, a 2, and a 3. 1, 2, 3. 3. And I'm telling you. And we have the packing for it, so you have to jiggle it along. That's so pretty.
Yes.
Just do like 30 seconds so we can pray.
362.
Let's see.
All right, now there's a 1 and a
2.
Oh, I choose one that's a 1 or 2. 1, and I just.
Good.
Oh, wow.
They'll never let me do this again because I'm not listening to a.
Cool.
Oh, it's like, all kinds of goodies. Oh, yes.
This is I'll draw the last one.
You got your glasses on.
Yeah, 3, 5, 6.
Thank you, Let's see what I get. Number 1, I'll take number 1, please.
John, you can stand the job.
The
Oh.
skinniest guy in the room.
I need to beef up, you know. Put your sample.
Okay, we've been drooling over that ever since it got
Well, I'm willing to share, pass it around.
here. Oh, well, we'll let you do that at the end of the meeting.
Okay, all right.
Okay, you've had a chance, I hope, to look over the minutes a little bit. Does anyone have a question about the minutes or anything that needs to be corrected? I would entertain a motion to accept the minutes as printed.
I move that we accept the minutes as presented.
Okay, do we have a second?
I second that.
Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Hi.
Opposed, same sign. Okay, motion carried. And Susie is going to introduce our speaker. We're so excited to have Lisa Rutherford with us tonight. And I know that you're in for a treat.
Oh, trying. Trying.
Yeah. They say they're probably alone.
Yeah, they are going faster. Yeah. Well, they're going faster too, because you can even hear it, but since they put those ties in, you don't feel it as much.
Now, I understood that they submitted a request to increase the speed and was granted, so,
Yeah, because you can hear it. It's going fast. So do not cross those guardrails if they're down, because that thing is going quick. And they used to go slower. They're not going slow. They're going pretty quick.
Okay, we're ready. All right. It's a pleasure to introduce my friend Lisa Rutledge. And whenever I first
Rutherford.
Oh, wow. See, I'm looking at Tammy Rutledge, which is showed now. So my mind just slipped way back to the ancient days. Well, not the ancient, wait a minute. Now I have flipping mouth disease. Okay, this is my friend, Lisa Rutherford. I better read it. She's not very good friend now. I should say, don't tell my dress I offended you.
I think it's worse.
When I first met Lisa, I was at the Cherokee Nation Art Center, and I was learning from Dorothy Ice, and Lisa just strolled through and, hi, what are y'all doing, you know, and she commented upon the different colors we'd chosen for our weaving, and she was positive, upbeat about it, and then she went on, and I thought, who's that? And then that went on for a time or two, and finally I was just curious, and I think I just tracked her down to her office and said, now, is this your office? What do you, because I'm curious. But anyway, I had no idea. Lisa is so unassuming, so unpretentious. I had no idea that Lisa was a national treasure, a Cherokee national treasure, that she started off in pottery and then expanded into textiles, expanded into beadwork, expanded into probably basket weaving. I mean, and then this latest adventure she's been on is making fur capes. I mean, feather capes. Making feather capes. So she is what I would call in baseball a utility player. I mean, she can play all the bases, and she can, you know, she can even manage the team because she also learned how to market her goods that she makes and manufactures. She learned it from Jane Osteen and different ones that she has gone to different art markets with. She has, and she probably won't tell you all this, and I'll try to keep it short so she can talk. She has won so many first prize awards for different categories, not just pottery, which she started out in, but also textiles, also this and also that. And she has won many firsts. She has been to the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C. She has been to Georg, and if I say that wrong, museum up in Indiana, I believe it is. She's been up there. She has been the speaker in many places. She has taught many people. I had no idea. I just thought, oh, there's Lisa. Hi, she's fun to talk to. I'll go talk to her. And so when I was asked to introduce Lisa, I said, sure, she's my friend. And then I looked all this stuff up online and thought, whoa, whoa, look at all this stuff she's done. But anyway, Lisa Rutherford is the 218 Cherokee National Treasure in pottery, but she also specializes in 18th century and early 19th century textiles. And I'm going to leave it up to her now. Oh, wait, two things. She's connected to Adair County in at least two ways I found. Her grandmother painted a picture of Goldie's watermill. And she learned to paint from her grandmother when she was about 5 or 6. And she also is friends with Ken Foster from the Rocky Mountain community. And she worked with him when they did the Chattanooga project in Tennessee. Okay, thank you, Lisa, for being here.
Thank you. I'm really happy to be here, and I also have family connections to Adair County. My grandfather was Joe Thornton, who was a world champion in archery. And Jinsey Tyndall Thornton was my great grandmother, and she lived out on Ottawahilla. My mother and my uncle Ken both inherited Ned Christie's land where his fort once was. So they sold that when I was a child, and I didn't even know who Ned Christie was then, but then I grew older and I'm like, oh, I wish we still had that. But they sold that, so I do have family connections. We still have the old family cemetery. I don't know who the owner of the place is now where Granny's house was, but we drove by last year when we were going to the cemetery. So my great granny is out at Titanic, and we go see her grave sometimes. But I'm going to talk mostly about pottery, but I'm going to also dip into the living history because, I mean, like all of you, I'm also very, I feel it's very important to preserve our history and let people know what happened and where we came from. And I'm starting to learn, I've done the 17th century, 18th century, the 1700s for quite a while, because that's what my pottery comes from. The clothing that I started wearing, once I learned pottery, I started demonstrating in period clothing. And the Eastern band was the big influence on me. They taught me how to make the clothing, and I have a lot of friends there in North Carolina as well. And I kind of branched out. I worked at the village at Deligua, which was a 1710 village. So I had to kind of back up a little bit earlier in my clothing. And then I went to work for Hunter's Home, or the Merle Home, as a lot of people know it. Although it was not George M. Merle's home, it was Minerva's, because George was a white man living in the Cherokee Nation. It belonged to Minerva Ross. She was a Cherokee citizen. This was her home and her plantation. So that is why after she died, he married her sister, and she had wanted him to marry Amanda because she wanted to keep that home and that property in her family. So I discovered I really don't like interpreting that time period. I don't like the clothing, and that's just not my thing. So my latest living history interpretation, I am teaming up with my friend Kathy Abercrombie, who is a loom weaver. And her grandparents ran the Oak Hill loom weaving hall up by Jay. So they lived in it, they ran it. It was a community weaving hall. Kathy has two of the looms, her grandmother's and her aunt's. So she does weaving demonstrations, and we can take that from the 1790s on up to the 50s or 60s even, but she has a small portable loom, and we picked the 40s because we like the clothes. So we're making our 40s dresses. She's going to demonstrate the loom weaving and talk about how the women use that for economic income to help support their families. And they were also selling this hand-woven wool to the public. So this is where I come in. My grandmother took my mom out there and bought a few yards of the wool and made her a suit. So local people were buying this wool and sewing. So I got a little hand crank sewing machine. I bought this little, it was in terrible shape. The motor was shot, so I converted it to a hand crank. And this one is a 1919. So I could sit there and sew with a hand crank and talk about that part of it. But we feel it's important that people know. I mean, a lot of us remember this time period, or our parents were alive, or grandparents, but the younger people, they don't have anybody that has any connection really to that time period. So they don't know how to sew, they don't know how to weave, they don't know what people were wearing or how women lived at that time. So that's one of the things that we want to preserve, as well as me going back into the 1800s and 1700s. The 1700s is by far my favorite. And that is the era that my pottery most of it comes from. So the way we make that pottery is to dig the clay, we process it, and I'll tell you more about that in a little while. But when that clay is ready to work, we start with a flat base, add your coils, you smooth them together, and I've got to mention Anna Mitchell. She was the person that revived Cherokee pottery here in Oklahoma after removal, because while the Eastern Band continued the pottery traditions, nobody here was making it. People got here most in the dead of winter. They were focused on getting housing, gardens, and surviving, and preparing their soil to plant in the spring. So we didn't need pots for cooking or serving anymore. And it just kind of died out, or beadwork died out. A lot of our other arts died out. So Anna, in I think it was 1969, started studying how to do this, and she went to the University of Arkansas. She went to North Carolina, and she studied. She met with the Eastern potters. But one thing about the pottery style was that it had changed. So the historic pottery, like in the 1700s, we were using these carved wood paddles to paddle the designs on. Anna didn't have access to paddles. She wasn't a wood carver. She had no one to make these, so she just simply made her stamps out of clay. She used the same iconography, the same symbolism, and you'll see a lot of these on my things today, like this hand symbol. That's one you'll see fairly often. I use a lot of contemporary designs on my stuff, but I also use a lot of the older things. This design is like a basket weave pattern. We always fuss with the basket weavers because they say it's basket weave. We say it's a pottery design. There's a lot of good-natured rivalry there, but we're still using the same symbols.
So what was the name of the weaving place in the J?
The Oak Hill Weavers. And there were several of these community weaving halls at the time. I think Dorothy told me there were like 20 of them at one time, and there were different tribes that had them. This was a Bureau of Indian Affairs initiative for economic development. So the only ones left, the only two buildings I know that are still standing is the one out at Briggs, the Sequoia Weavers, and the one at Oak Hill. And neither one of them they're just barely standing. So I don't know. I think I've heard they're gonna take down the one at Oak Hill because it's dangerous, and I hate to see that. They did remove the mural. They did remove the Cecil Dibb mural that was over the fireplace out of there, and it's being preserved. But these, the pottery, I'll get back to my pottery stamps here. Anna was making little clay stamps like these to just stamp hers. But the Eastern Band also quit using these because they were a tourist-driven economy. They have a huge tourism industry there, and the tourists wanted shiny black pottery. They didn't really like the, let's see, this one is one that's, so this one was fired in a wood fire. That's a paddle stamp design. It's not flashy. It's not really that pretty. So a lot of people didn't want their pottery. They wanted the shiny black instead of the stamped smoky smoke cloud coloring. So they started making more of a shiny polished Catawba style pottery. So the Eastern Band, this is a good example of how we all work together. They got an initiative together, I think it was the early 2000s, and they wanted to revive the stamped pottery. So they partnered with one of their local universities and the Museum of the Cherokee Indian and got a team together. And one of the people was Tamara Bean, and you can give that woman a little few broken shards of pottery and she could put it back together. She could figure out what the paddle looked like that stamped it. She's just amazing. And Joel Queen was an Eastern Band potter. He was also in that group. So I learned from Jane Austie and from Anna. I guess it was 2006 when we first started hearing about their initiative. And then we got wind that there was a Cherokee pottery conference in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. So we had to go. And I don't know how we managed to get the money together to go, but we did. And we met Tamara and Joel, and by noon, we had already planned a class in Tahlequah. So that came to be the following winter, and we all learned how, we got together a bunch of people that we felt would be teachers that would continue and teach this.
Now, is that actually made, is that one made out of clay?
No, this is wood.
I was gonna say that had the appearance of being out of wood.
Yeah, they were carved wood, and Anna just used the clay because she
That's
wasn't a
what
wood
she had,
carver.
yeah.
Yeah, this one's starting to get split too. Now, this is not one of my favorite ones. I have some that Joel made, and some of them he gave to me, and I won't even take them with me when I'm traveling. I'm so scared something might happen to one. But,
Well, it's hard with wood to sometimes get your curve, because it depends on how the wood grain is going, you can't. So that's why I was asking, because that's hard to do.
yeah, I don't know how, I think Michael Yentz from Heritage Center carved this one. So the way you use this paddle, you get your pot formed, and then you have to support it on the inside. You have to smack it pretty hard to get that pattern, and you're overstamping. So I might just be hitting it with this part. So when you look at the paddle, you don't see this exact design on your pot. So that's why it was really difficult. That's why I'm so impressed with Tammy, when she can look at these patterns and figure out what the paddle looked like. So we all learned from her, and probably all of us that are doing pottery today, the older generation learned from Anna, and then we've got the second generation. A lot of them have learned from Jane, but we've also learned from Crystal Hanna, from Victoria Vasquez. There's other potters, second and even third generation potters now who are teaching. So it has pretty much been revived. And then some of the other surface treatments. This is one of my favorite. I like the way it feels. I just roll it on there and imprint the corn kernel design. And I've got some at home that have really crooked rows. I really like those because it's not like perfect. And then we use the dried corn cobs. And this one looks like it's had the kernels cut off of it. This probably came from Hunter's Home. They probably ran it through the, now I forgot what it's called. But I had, I took a feed sack of these home and I used them both to stamp the pottery, but I also burned them to fire the pottery. And I use pine cones. If this gets wet, it's gonna close up tight and it'll make a nice imprint.
That'll reclose if you get it wet. Amazing.
Because I think this one, well, the smaller ones will. So this one is another favorite tool. This is a black walnut. So I use the sides to get the texture, and it's got really different patterns. And well, it looks like a squirrel got one end of it, but usually on this end, you can sometimes get a cross design. This one's not very distinct. I couldn't find all of my tools when I left. Then I have shells. This one got broken apparently. So I can use this part to stamp, like if I'm doing leaves or flowers or something, I might put that in there, or I just use it for background texture, or you can use the edge for lines, and you can use it as a rocker stamp, just kind of zigzag up and down if they're not broken. And then I have a stone, a smooth stone that's got clay all over it. We use to polish the pottery. Now, all this does two things. It compresses your clay and it makes your vessel stronger, but it also gives you a texture that makes like a cooking pot. It's easier to hold on to, and it gives you something interesting to look at. So it's not all just decorative. There actually are uses. So once I started doing this and started demonstrating, I started learning more about living history interpretation. And since history and art are my favorite things, I thought, hey, this is just perfect for me. So when I met the Eastern Band, their museum staff shared some of the instructions. They had done a lot of research, and at the time, there was a lot of things just for tourism in there. They were kind of getting criticized. They were wearing plains regalia. They had Cherokees out there in headdresses. and they were charging to have pictures made, and some of them were making a really good living. I heard of one man that put 2 or 3 kids through college, just, they called it chiefing. So he would just take pictures with tourists and that regalia. So they started wanting to have more accurate representations. So they started doing a lot of research into the clothing. And Dr. Barbara Duncan was the education director of the museum. She was one of the first people I met, and she shared her research with me, and I just shared some of it with Susie. And they advised me, there's a group called the Warriors of Audagatua that are dancers that go out to do cultural presentations. And I started running into them at a lot of festivals and events, and I met a lot of the Eastern Band artists. Well, they're all wearing wool wrap skirts, leggings, linen trade shirts. Some of the ladies started wearing the linen skirts, like the white women in the 1700s wore linen petticoats. They might wear 1 or 2, and then you would wear a gown over it, which is like a skirt that was just came to, the front was open and it just came to the sides. And then, of course, they wore their shift or chemise under all that.
Do that.
So when the Cherokee
See,
ones
it takes that line off.
trade and barter, they were wearing the skirts, but they were cutting them off a little, of the linen petticoats. They wore them as skirts, cut them off a little bit shorter to be more practical. They would wear the chemises as dresses or cut them off to shirt length. They were wearing the trade shirts like the men were wearing, and the men were wearing the wool breechcloths and leggings. And a lot of people think we just wore buckskin. We had textiles back 9,000 years ago. We had twined textiles, and I don't have any twining. But that is like a form of hand weaving. And I really thought I had my bag in the car and it wasn't there. But, they had twined skirts. They had very fine fabrics. And it's just like a form of weaving where you have pairs of warps, and then you take your weft thread and you're basically twisting 2 wefts over each pair. So it's just a very simple form of weaving. So we had that. The earliest examples are at least 9,000 years old. And in the 1690s, we had wool, we had linen. So we already had a strong trade network in the late 1600s.
Where did the linen come from?
From England.
Okay, so
Yeah, and the trade networks had, we were getting, I think they were even getting called from India, when I was at Colonial Williamsburg, they were talking about all the different countries we were trading with. I was just amazed.
there was, the English were in there, and they would pick something up from one country and trade for something from another country.
Yeah, we had, I mean, it was amazing the trade networks we had in the 1690s. And that's when we were starting to get guns. And of course, the 1700s is when the deerskin trade era started. And that was a century of great changes that weren't really that good. The men were trading deerskins for guns, for ammunition. They were decimating the deer population. They were shipping these hides to England. And it got to the point, well, if you have a gun, you've got to have ammunition, you've got to have a powder horn. And they were just trading. It wasn't long before everybody was just dependent on trade. And the women, of course, are getting cloth. And if you have a deer skin, it's very labor intensive to tan that hide. And you've got to use the brains of the animal and work it in. And you've got to work it with a wooden tool till it's dry. So you could trade a few of those, of the raw hides, for some wool, and you could just wrap it around and tie it. So it's a lot more practical. But the wool wrap skirts, I like those, and even the leggings in the winter when it's cold, they're very warm. We were trading for wool stroud cloth, which is very thick. And it's super expensive right now to get the stroud. The edges were like a white zigzag because they clamped it into a frame for dyeing, and the factory that made that stroud cloth in England burned. So we can't get it anymore, and now we've got individuals that are buying white blankets that are dyeing them, they're buying a white Stroud, and I don't know where they're getting that. So it's like hundreds of dollars a yard. I think 116 is a yard is one of the prices that I found. So I buy wool that is not the Stroud, but it is from accurate for the time period. So there's a lot of, well, not a lot, there's a few vendors that are selling historic reproduction fabrics. So I've got some from Colonial Williamsburg and places like that. So, and they're still, sometimes they're like $25, $26 a yard for the wool. So I have quite an investment in my historic clothing. But I figured out that when I started doing my art and the pottery, started doing art markets, you have to pay an application fee, you've got to pay a booth fee, you're gonna have to load up everything, pack it. Sometimes you have to take a tent. I don't do outdoor shows anymore, really. You've got gas expenses, you've got hotels, festival food usually is ridiculously priced, and then you work your tail off for 2 days or even 3, and you pack up and go home. You might not break even. You might do well, you might not. It's just, it depends on weather, so many factors. So I was getting a little discouraged, and then I realized people will pay me to come and bring things. Usually I can sell things as well, and to dress in my period clothing and demonstrate this. And then I can talk about these time periods and the things I'm working on. And usually I'll get lodging, sometimes mileage, sometimes meals. So I think that's a lot better deal than just going to the art markets. And I love the history, and I've been fortunate, as Susie said, I got to be a part of the 1777 Cherokee delegation to Colonial Williamsburg during the Return of the Cherokee Week. And Betty Frog, she's also a Adair County girl. Betty and I got hired the last 2 years that they had it. They're not having that event anymore, so they had a big reduction in staff. But we were hired to come out early in the week and demonstrate in their camp all week. So we worked alongside the American Indian Initiative staff. There were 4 women on that original delegation, and Betty and I represented 2, and then they had 2 women on their staff that represented the others. So one of them was cooking over a fire. Betty and I were under canvas lean-tos, and I thought, well, I don't think people are going to pay extra to come in here to this camp, and boy, they did. They had us so crowded the first day, and it was one of the hottest, first super hot days. So Betty and I are sitting there in this little canvas lean-to, and it's probably about this tall. And we had so many people packed in front of us that were cutting off the breeze, the airflow. So we were just roasting in there. But they finally backed off a little bit, but then it rained, and the coordinator, he said, "You guys are such good sports. I can't believe you're still, you're doing such a good job on all this rain and heat." We just started laughing because we worked at Daily Law Village. We've been doing that for the past 3 weeks. We were used to that kind of conditions. But it was a lot of fun. We got to meet a lot of people, and then the Eastern Band, there were, I think, a couple of them that came in a few days after we did. And then the Onondaga Warriors came in that weekend to dance. So we got to dance on the Palace Green with them, just like they did 300 years ago. So it was.
What festival was that?
It was called Return of the Cherokee at Colonial Williamsburg, Virginia. So we also demonstrated at Cherokee Days at the National Museum of the American Indian at DC. And I think I've gone to that twice. The Eastern Band also comes. And so really we interact with the Eastern Band artists and cultural educators a lot. So that was a lot of fun. I think the first time we had it, it was so crowded. And they told us, the coordinator that was dealing with us told us that people were calling from the other museums on the mall, saying, what is this Cherokee Day? So people keep coming and asking us. And they said we had 30,000 people through that museum in the 3 days of the event. So it was pretty intense. But one of the perks of being able to go is that Cherokee Nation businesses are the ones that sponsored us, I guess, and coordinated it. They arranged for us to go out a day or two early so we could go to the collections of the Smithsonian facilities. And we got to go, it's in Suitland, Maryland, which is 30 minutes from the museum. That is called the Cultural Resource Center. And we were able to, you can look online at their collections and see what they got. So we were able to request things ahead of time that we wanted to look at. So, and I didn't even think when we got up there, I have a feather cape in their collection. I totally forgot, and we're looking around, and I'm really excited looking at all the Cherokee things. I'm like, oh, I have a cape in here. And I asked the guy that was leading us, I said, can I see my feather cape? And he kind of looked at me like he thought I was making it up. I said, no, really, it's a feather cape. And so he looked it up, and it was way up. It was on a shelf, probably as high as his ceiling. And I had to climb this little ladder thing up there. And I don't like heights. But I got up there and I was able to see it again. It was spread out in one of those flat drawers. My little cousin Whitney is one of the communications people for CNB, and she climbed up that ladder with me to take my picture with my cape. So we've got this crazy picture up there, 10 feet high, looking at that feather cape.
So Lisa, tell them just briefly, like you weave the framing for those capes.
Yeah, the feather capes, I started wanting one when the Eastern Band women started getting them. And of course I can't afford one. And so I got a hold of one that, it was Mary Ellen Meredith, the lady that taught the Eastern Band in Maine. And her name was Deborah Harding from the Carnegie Museum in Pittsburgh. So me and Tanya Weevil, who's another Cherokee National Treasure for clothing, and David Fowler from Hunter's Home, sat down for a week studying this stupid cape, trying to figure out how to make that net base. It's a hand-tied net. David knew how to make nets, but not this kind. So they abandoned me finally. They had other obligations, and I finally followed that thread path until I figured it out. I wasn't tying my knots correctly, but I got one made. And later, I think it was that summer, I got to meet with Deborah, and I had a little mini class with her, me and one of the Eastern ladies. And she showed me the proper way to tie the knot and helped me get straightened out on it. So I've been making them ever since.
How many hours do you put into a cape?
Oh, gosh. It kind of depends on the size, but it takes me about 2 days to make the net. And I could probably make it in a day if I could just sit down and weave nonstop. But after a while, I start getting calluses. My thumbs are getting swollen here and here now. So I have to take a break.
And you don't glue the feathers like some people.
Now, the feathers are, I fold down, like the quill end of the feather, I fold it down over a little nail or a wire. And then I lash it down with this what is it called? I think it's a wrapping knot is the actual official name of it. And then you wrap it around, stick the end through, you're basically pulling the loop back under it, kind of like a hangman knot's what it kind of looks like. So I have to tie hundreds, oh gosh, there's probably 850, 900, it depends on the size of it. And the thread starts making my fingers really sore, so I usually end up with Band-Aids on all my fingers, and I have to take breaks and go work on pottery or something else between it. So I usually ask for 3 weeks to make one. And I've taken longer when I was working.
There's still one on display at the Cherokee History Museum.
The ones, yeah, I have the pre-contact display there. They asked me to make 3 feather capes for that exhibit. They said they wanted a war chief, a peace chief, and a beloved woman. So I said, okay, but the war chief, he's gonna need a bow and arrows, and it needs to be made by Noel Grayson. He makes the one for that time period. And she's gonna need a swan wing. So I know someone that makes fans, and Wade Blevins, I said, Wade knows how to make fans. So I went home and I'm texting both and emailing them, and hey, you need to bid on this job. Here's a picture of what it looks like, and then here's a picture of the fan at Williamsburg. And the things I couldn't make, I recommended people that could make them, and I didn't think they would listen to me, but they did, and most of the things I wanted are there. So Noel made the war club, the bow, arrows, the quiver. One of them I think has a gourd rattle. I think David Scott might have, I'm not sure who made that.
I have one question. Okay, the Eastern bands stayed there and, okay, so from that time when there was this separation, did some of the craftsmanship or did some of the styling change after this period, or did they kind of bring the same with them?
Some of it has changed a little bit. There's just, the pottery style there are some doing the traditional styles. And I've taken classes with Joel Queen from Eastern Band too. He's pretty contemporary, but he can do the very traditional stuff too.
Okay, so they are doing some new.
Yeah,
Traditional.
so they're doing all kinds of different things. They've got some really talented artists there. So we always trade information and tools and advice. Yes.
Do you give classes?
I do sometimes. I can't teach pottery right now because I don't have a place to teach it. The art center, we've totally outgrown it. Troy Jackson is teaching Raikou pottery now. And if Jane wants to teach, I think she teaches there sometimes. There's no space for the students to put up their work of stored from one class to the next. You can't really move it. So I'm just kind of waiting, hoping eventually we'll get a new art center that has a bigger space. And I have a studio at home, but it's not set up yet. It's not really, for one thing, it only has a portable air conditioner, and when it's 100 degrees, it's still not very cool in there.
Winter classes up.
Yeah. But I don't have plumbing there, I don't have a restroom, and I don't really
Anything
want.
other than pottery then?
I can do pottery, beadwork, the beaded, like the bandolier bags and beaded purses. What else do I do? Twining. I haven't really taught any sewing classes, taught feather cape classes. I've taught that at the Institute of American Indian Arts. I taught 2 night classes there a few years back, and that was really fun. That's in Santa Fe. And then, what else? I can teach baskets, but I just know the basics. There's better basket weavers than me. I mean, people that are more experienced. I don't know how to do the lids that well. And there's just a lot more people that are a lot better, so I kind of stick with what I know. But I can, I could probably teach clothing, but I'm not real comfortable with anything. I have trouble, like for a modern pattern, I have trouble fitting people. I have trouble fitting myself because you have to alter the patterns, and I'm just not very good at that. But I do teach sometimes at the Cherokee Arts Center.
So when you're doing the clothing though, with the dresses, are you doing the linen type?
I make the linen petticoats, the linen chemises or the trade shirts, and the wool wrap skirts. So I've done the leggings, the breech clothes for the men, and I've even done leather deerskin clothing for the two at the History Museum. And the beloved woman is wearing a twine wrap skirt, and she has a feather cape that is over one shoulder. So those, gosh, they take forever. And a lot of people think that white cape identifies the beloved woman. I've been looking for about 12 years for any documentation whatsoever to suggest that that was something worn exclusively by a beloved woman, and I've not found anything at all to.
Lisa, for those who don't know, could you explain to people culturally what the beloved woman is?
Basically, she was a war woman. Yeah, it was a war title. She was, and the Eastern Band still has them sometimes, but now it's more like an honored one. Someone that has accomplished a lot, usually it's someone that has promoted the culture and done a lot for their nation. But originally it started out as a war title.
The microphone's on.
And the woman helping the,
Okay.
helping the warriors prepare the ground, get ready to do ceremony, get ready to go to war. So, but I haven't found any indication anywhere that suggests that she had a white feather cape. The men also wore the long feather mantles. They probably, the war chief, I think he wore the turkey feather one because the turkey, I believe that's the war bird. You see symbols with the two turkeys fighting, and I used to laugh that some people would call them the kissing birds. Two male turkeys, they're not kissing, they're fighting. If you've been around turkeys, they fight, and it's pretty traumatic to watch, because we had some at Hunter's Home, and they really hit each other. They're brutal. They wear turkey feathers sometimes. I think that was what the war chief wore, and then the peace chief, white is the color of peace. So I made a white cape for the peace chief, and I ended up, I think swan feathers might be what they had used, but I can't really find much evidence of that. I used white turkey feathers. So, and then I made the top with goose feathers like I do my regular capes. But someone sent me a feather analysis from Spiral Mounds, because there were fragments of feather capes found there, and I did get to study those at the Smithsonian. But, oh yeah, I forgot to mention, I did a artist leadership program where I got to spend 10 days doing research at the different Smithsonian facilities. So I got to go in and look at they had twined skirts that we found in Clifty Creek, Tennessee. There were 2 of them I got to study. They had fragments of feather blankets or mantles. I'm not sure exactly what they were, but it was kind of scary to go look at those, because the biggest fragments were in the Museum Support Center, which is the collection of the National Museum of Natural History. The first collection I went through was the NMAI collection. They each have different facilities, but these 2 are close together. And when you go in, it's like low ceiling bunkers. It's like a concrete bunker. And I think they said it was the size of 4 football fields, and there's probably, I can't remember how many stories, I want to say 4. So you go in and it's dark, and as you go down an aisle, you have to turn the light on. So you're in the one lit aisle in this huge, creepy tomb-like building. And then we would open the drawer and they would tell us, okay, we have to leave for, I think, 5 minutes until it off gases, because these were treated with arsenic. So, and we couldn't touch them. They have plexiglass over them. So that is how they tried to kill bugs and preserve them back in the day. But these were from Spyro. And what kind of struck me is the background were red feathers, and it had a design woven into it in feathers, and the design was a feather. It was white with black, like an eagle feather. And it was outlined, I think, in the flag. And when I looked at that, I mean, they were big feathers, and I started remembering the shell carvings I've seen. A lot of those shell carving figures, they'll have their arms out, and it shows big feathers hanging from their arms. And I always just thought that was a stylized feather cape, but now I think maybe it could have been this blanket or mantle, and they were actually showing the design on it, but I don't know. So I immediately said, I need to go look at some of those shells.
Well, I think they, like in a documentary I once watched, that the trade routes were quite extensive in the Americas because they were trading here from Oklahoma, from Spiro down to South America.
Mhm.
So there was a big trade route going through the Americas before contact.
Yeah, we had access to all kinds of brightly colored feathers and things. One of my feather capes I made for one of the previous Miss Cherokees, it was white, and I had lime green feathers around the neck. And I actually made it, and then they purchased it for Miss Cherokee. And people start saying, well, that's not traditional. That wasn't we didn't have birds that color. And I'm like, Carolina parakeet. We used Carolina parakeet feathers, and they were discolored. So that was another opportunity to educate people. We even had indigenous flamingos, and I think they were in Florida. So we had some really brightly colored feather capes. The earliest documentation of them that I have seen is 1540, when DeSoto talks about the men of the Southeast tribes, and he doesn't identify which tribe they are. And I think he was just too busy dispatching them, but he talks about them wearing long feather mantles woven on a net similar to the base of a wig. And I've not really looked at the wigs from I've seen the wig makers at Williamsburg, but I don't really know what the base to those look like. But he described them, and I always it was Lieutenant Henry Timberlake. I keep trying to call him Justin. So far I haven't done it in public yet, but he spent 3 months with the Cherokees in 1762. He stayed with the Cherokees as a show of faith, and everybody thought he was crazy because he was a English soldier. He was totally ignorant of the blood law.
Oh, yeah.
Cherokee blood law meant if any white person killed any Cherokee person, we could go after him or anyone, because we have clans, and the blood law means if I'm Paint Clan and I go kill somebody that's Bird Clan, their family can come after anybody in my clan in retaliation. Well, that's a pretty good incentive not to do that. If I know they might not come after me, they might go after my family. So they kept asking the white people, what is your clan? And they didn't have one. So, oh, they're all the same clan. So if anyone had killed a Cherokee person at that time, they could have killed him, and he didn't know that. So he went with them. I can't remember now the details of why they needed a show of faith. I'm gonna have to get my book out and do research, but he didn't want to go with him. He insisted on taking a different route. I think he tried a water route, and anyway, they gave him up for dead before he finally got there, because the Cherokees got there so far ahead of him. But he did several foolish things, but the important thing that he did is he wrote down in his journal every day what they did, what the women were doing, what the men were doing. And there's very little written about Cherokee women, especially their clothing. They'll tell you what the men were wearing, but not the women. And he would talk about the foods and some of the things you can look at. And if you're familiar with Cherokee culture, you can see he obviously misinterpreted it, but he reports what he thinks he saw. And he talked about the women wearing the goose feather capes, and they were worn for warmth. They also had blankets woven out of them. Of course, Spiro's not a Cherokee site, but when I studied the things there, they had some rabbit fur woven skirts. I never could figure out how those were made. I want to look at those again if I get to go back.
Did they have a skin with skin?
I think it was just spun hair from what and the women that I've talked to on different Facebook groups, I'm in a bunch of different weaving groups. The Choctaw ladies, they've got a great group. And they let me join even though I'm not Choctaw. But we all share information. And some of I can't remember which group it was, but they've actually spun the rabbit hair. But I think they're using like Angora rabbits that have the long fibers and mixing it with something else. So that could be what this was done. Because they were telling me one of the skirts, I thought it had feathers, and they said, no, this is not feathers. This says it was one of the plant-based. I'm like, well, it has a quill in it. There's a feather quill right here. So they added that to the record. And I noticed that every time I said something, the curator was writing. And I kind of looked at her. She said, whatever you tell me, I'm going to write down and add to the record for this object, because when we get someone, especially someone from the tribe, that the object is from, that comes in and makes observations, we don't change our original record, but we add it. And we'll say on this day, Lisa Rutherford said, this is not what we had it labeled, and they will add that. So that way, if 3 different people come in and have a different opinion, you've got it all, so you can look at it and make your own determination. And one of the guys showed me, he said, we have when I was looking at the skirt, the twine skirt, and it was metal fibers, he said, we have a split cane basket, a fragment of it. And I said, well, can I see? So he took me over and opened this drawer, and I looked at it, and I kind of started laughing. I said, that's not a basket. He said, it says a split cane. I said, well, first of all, it's a fish trap. And these canes, this is not split. This is not what split cane looks like. And especially for the baskets, I said, this has just been smashed. And you can see right here where the cordage has it twined together. It's wider here and it gets narrower. And he's like, well, what does one look like? So I had to explain to him what fish traps look like. And it had been found in a Cherokee site. So I worked at the village. I mean, I worked alongside Noel Grayson, and he's amazing. He had made one. I'd seen other people make them. So, I recognized it for what it was. But I don't think he wrote that down. But it was pretty amazing to get that experience. And another one of the venues that I got to demonstrate at was Silver Dollar City. And that was so fun. I'd been traveling a lot and I was super tired by the time I got there. And it was like everything was uphill both ways. And so it took me a while to even get the energy to walk up to the employee commissary. But it was a lot of fun. We stayed in, they have backup house apartments. The Cowboy and Craft Festival was happening, and we were right beside the big barn. So I got to hang out with Bud Taylor, and Bud played Newly on Gunsmoke. So I had always thought he was just the cutest thing on Gunsmoke back when I was a little kid. And he's still cute. He's 80 something. I guess he'd be 80. He's probably 84 now.
Very talented.
But yeah, Tommy Wildcat was there, and another artist, and we ended up having to we were in a little encampment, and 3 times a day I gave a 20-minute presentation. So I would stand up there and talk about the pottery, and I started out demonstrating, and I very quickly learned people are getting up, walking away. They don't want to watch me make a pot. They want to hear me talk. They want to hear stories about it, and I would just tell funny stories of things happened when I was digging clay and got trapped down in the pit and couldn't get out and stuff like that. When the train passed, that really made me think of that earlier, because they had that little train that it was on a hill below us, behind me. And I would hear that train coming and I'd be talking to my little group, and I had a microphone, so there were people, I had a little group in front of me in chairs, but I was also speaking to people in the whole plaza area, people that were in some of the buildings even, and over in line to the Wild West show. So I was speaking to a very big area, and I would hear that train, and I would stop and say, okay, everybody go like this. And they would just look at me. And that train would hit the whistle, and everybody would jump, and I'm like, told you, and I would just keep walking. So I have a lot of fun with that. But yeah, nobody would put their hands over their ears. I don't know why. But yeah, that was a lot of fun. I was there for 3 weeks, and at the end of 3 weeks, I was ready to come home. And just recently, in April, I was an artist in residence at the Institute of American Indian Arts in Santa Fe. I applied for 2 weeks, then they asked me, well, can you come a little bit earlier? And I have chickens and I have cats, and I hated to have my mom, I hated to have her take care of my animals. And she kept saying she could do it. Well, it turns out she missed me really bad and got stressed over her dog chasing my cats and everything, but somehow I ended up spending a full month out there. And I'm like, this is totally out of my comfort zone. I had an apartment, I had a studio at the Institute. I taught a twining class to the students. So I got interviewed a few times. My studio partner was a beadwork artist from Alaska, and we really clicked. We had a great time. And she's one of the co-creators of the children's PBS series, Molly of Denali. It's like an animated series.
Yeah.
So yeah, one of the recent episodes, she wrote it. So I learned all about Alaska and living in a camp, and she lives on the Yukon River in the summer, and then she lives in Anchorage in the winter. So we really had fun. But that was quite an experience working there, and I was a lot out of my comfort zone at first, and I was intimidated by the traffic because, for one thing, their street signs are faded out from the sun, and their streets aren't well marked. So you'll be driving along, and all of a sudden there's a turning lane that you can't really see. And I got in the turning lane, and then I stopped, I looked, and I went straight, and there's a car just blaring on his horn. And I thought, what did I do? And it took me like 2 days to figure out that I had been in a turning lane, and that street turns to a one-way street. I was going the right way, luckily. But I got over it, I learned my way around. And then we had dust storms, and then the wildfires started. So by the time I left, there was Taos had a fire. It's like north of us, I can't remember. But there were fires on like 3 sides of us, and the closest ones were like 20 and 25 miles. So whichever way the wind blew, Santa Fe was covered in smoke. And I have asthma, so I have allergies. I get altitude sickness. So I was starting to get really sick there by the end of that last week. But I had a great time. I got to learn a lot. I got exposed to a lot of different cultures. We got to visit the Meow Wolf installation, which, are you familiar with that? No. Okay, I don't know how to describe it, but everything's fluorescent. It's like an interactive art exhibit, and it's huge. You go in there, and there was a story behind it, but I was more worried about COVID. We had to wear masks then, and I didn't want to get in with a crowd of people, but you could go into the room, and there were letters and stuff, and it was like a futuristic science fiction type story about this family and what happened to them. Somebody got lost in another dimension, but you go through this house and you can find clues to it. I just looked. I thought, this is too much work. So you're free to walk through this, and there's just crazy art things. I mean, there might be there's these little puppet looking creatures, and Rochelle told me to touch one on the head and see what it does. I was afraid to, I didn't touch it. you could open doors and you'd be in a dark hallway and open that door and there's no telling what would be in there. So there was one room, like a black and white kitchen, and it was like a optical illusion. And I walked into this one room and there was a clothes dryer sitting there with blue lights around it. And I kind of looked at it, go, what is that? And this couple walked in and the guy looked around, he dove head first into it and disappeared. And I wish I could have seen my face, but I was just like, where'd it go? And then the girl followed him. And so I'm running over there and looking in, I'm like, I'm not going in there. And I walked out into the hallway and turned a corner and they were crawling out of this little opening in the wall. So there was something in there.
So your skills and your art has really taken you a lot of places and a lot of different experiences.
Mm-hmm.
When you did the twining, did you start out, I mean, was there a limit to how wide you could twine something? I mean, did it have to be on loom? I think?
No, the old ones, there's illustrations, they had 2 posts in the ground and they tied a cord across.
Okay.
And what I usually do is I've got a garment rack I use as my frame, so I can lower it down and then I can just lash the top of it to that pole so it doesn't sag in the middle.
Because I saw examples on the internet of twining, and it looks like the possibilities for beauty are just beyond our imagination.
Yeah, you can get basic twining is really simple, but you can start doing reverse twist. We call it S twist and Z twist because it looks like this or like an S. You can add colors, you can do double twist to make the right color come up. There's just a lot of different variations.
Is it always flat, like macrame might be round?
It's not always like the bags I make. I couldn't find the bag I wanted to bring, and so I just didn't bring any of them. I don't know why. But I make little frames with dowel rods, just the wooden dowels, and I put spacers between it, and you just go around and around and you can make a bag. And then when you get to the bottom, you can tie the fringe together and make the bottom. You can twine them together, or you can make the top part of it, the bottom, and sew it together. And there's just a lot of different variations. So,
Would you be willing to teach twining if we had a class and gathered up pupils?
it'll be a while before I have time, but yeah.
We have nothing to do with weight.
I'm booked up right now until probably the middle of December.
Well, that sounds even sooner than I thought you could even do it.
Yeah, it may be January. I don't know. I've got, I have made 4, 5. I think I'm working on my 7th feather cape this year. And I've got other people wanting them, and they're really expensive, so I don't know why. I was surprised I'm selling so many, but I've done 3 weddings this year. A lot of women want them for if they're Cherokee, they want a traditional item for their wedding.
Can you sell them for about?
About $1,000.
Yeah, yeah.
It depends on
How many feathers and stuff?
how many feathers, what type of netting, how size, amount of time. Yeah, it takes.
Well, I have a feeling we could probably, before you left, have a list of people with telephone numbers that would be willing to wait for your availability to do it. That just sounds like it would be something
The
really
twining,
exciting to do.
Yeah. Usually my feather cape students, if they're not already an accomplished artist, they're not gonna finish one. I was basically forced to teach a class one time by someone I worked for. None of them were artists, and I don't think anybody in there finished theirs.
Yeah, we don't want to do feather cakes.
Yeah, we want to keep the
We
twine look like
we-
one of
yeah,
the
we want to
second-
keep the simple twining possibly, you know.
Yeah, those are fairly easy. And you don't really even need a loom if you want something small, like the one I taught at the Institute. I just had them save me some heavy boxes, and you can just cut a piece of cardboard the shape you want, tie your base cord around that, and just work your way around it.
Oh.
So that way you can make a custom size.
Mhm.
If you want one to fit your phone or a tablet or something, you can make whatever size you want.
And before you leave, Wanda has something for you and Emily has something for you. So,
Are we ready?
so tell us when you're ready.
Well, I've covered about everything I could think of, and,
Yeah.
Lisa, the items you have on the table, are these for sale?
yes.
Okay, so that's good to know, and we can look at her table, we'll have some refreshments and look at
You
the
don't
table.
happen to carry one of those things that you can slide?
Yes,
She does?
yes,
Oh,
yeah,
woman after our own.
Yeah.
heart.
Square.
Yeah. yeah, she said art market. That's your clue.
Yeah.
Marketing.
Yeah.
Is there anything else?
Any
Okay.
questions?
Should Wanda be first?
Yeah, let me
No,
go
the
first.
first,
Okay.
okay.
Well, I just wanted to tell you, Lisa, that a couple of weeks ago, when they had the CCO conference, one of the sessions that I looked at was done by Julie Reed. And in her presentation, she referred to you, said that she looks to Lisa as the expert in feather cakes. So you have a great endorsement there from her.
Yeah, I remember her, I was writing it up, there's something on my computer that says feather cake notes for Julie.
Okay. Well, I'm always interested in hearing things about Anna Mitchell. Her husband, Robert Clay Mitchell, and my dad were second cousins.
Oh, really?
So they are both descendants of Richard Clark Foreman. And so I've always been interested in Anna's work, and we're talking about, we have a saying here that, you know, we're all cousins. And I asked Lisa a few questions before she came. And so I looked back in my database to see what I had. Didn't really have time to do very much research, but just looking to see, because we have a pretty big database here now of Cherokee as well as non-Cherokee citizens. And so I found that we had quite a bit on your Thornton line. And so Joe Tyndall Thornton, this was your
Grandpa.
okay. So it's his line, and I have more on the Thorntons that continue on over here, able to go back several generations. And then on Tensy's grandmother, Susan Squirrel, I had several things already on her line. So
Oh, that's awesome.
we can research and do more, but this is for you. And so each of those, then I did a sheet on the families. So you see all the brothers and sisters. And this is William Thornton or Wiley and Jency and all of their children that I know of. There may be some others. So you bring me up to date if there are.
Is she related to Ruby Thornton by any chance?
Well, that would be to Ruby's husband.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
I had an Aunt Ruby, but she passed.
right. And there's a
Oh, yeah,
Ruby
this
Thornton
would
in
be-
here, but it was a maiden name Thornton.
Yeah.
Yes.
Ruby Thornton was my third grade teacher.
Oh.
Yes. But this Ruby Thornton, the Ruby Thornton you have, her maiden name was Harris.
Well, she married, Ruby Thornton married a Harris.
But what was her maiden name? I've forgotten.
She's Betty
Anyway.
Barker, related to Betty Barker.
Right. Half sister to Betty. Okay, and then William's parents were Joseph Thornton and Betty and Peggy Gritz, and here are their children. And then his father was Wiley Glover Thornton, and mother was Nancy Jane Bremer, and here are their children. And then this was as far back as I had been able to go to John Thornton, who was born in 1770 in Campbell County, Virginia, and Nancy Jane Scott. And she was born in Cherokee Nation, East Tennessee. And these are two of their children. And like I say, there may be others. So
Oh, thank you
anyway,
so much.
this is just kind of gives you an idea of what we're doing here as far as genealogy is concerned. And we always love adding more names, so I'd like to have your other lines in addition to your forms. And I'll lay this right up here for you as well.
And Wanda, I think we can always find a Cherokee connection to, and we can always find that Adair County connection, because I believe everybody came through Adair County on their way to somewhere else.
I'm probably kin to 2 or 3 people in here.
Yes, probably. There's only like, in regular world, there's 6 degrees of separation. In the Cherokee world, there's what, 2?
Probably.
Well, it's kind of narrowed in the gap where they came, they came up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, like I tell people, someone said, you can't be related to that many people, and I'm like,
Wanda,
hey, there's somebody talking.
Wanda,
Miss McGee?
Betty McGee. I'm on the computer watching, and I have enjoyed it so much. And I want you to know I went all the way through grade school with your uncle, Kenneth Thornton. And I have kept up with him all these years, and he was a wonderful, wonderful person.
Thank you, Betty.
Thanks.
Okay.
All right, Lisa, this is a gift to you, and then this is a little thank you. So we're so
thank you
glad
so
you made
much.
your way from.
Can you hold that?
Can I hold?
Because the message is what
Oh, yeah.
really touched us.
Yeah. We really like this one. He saw me, that's just cute.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah. Let's see how okay. She works with her hands she works with her hands into life. Proverbs 31:13. We just thought it was really cute and it fits her. And there's a handwriting sewing machine. Handwriting sewing machine. We didn't know you had one. We didn't know you had one. So it always works out. That's all I always
I
say.
have 11 sewing machines.
You don't have a problem.
Yeah.
That's
Don't ask me
normal.
how many of them were, but yeah, I've got a hand crank, and I have my Granny Jency's 1923 Singer treadle.
Oh, nice.
For my great granny. So yeah, I use that. That's probably my go-to machine at home. And I just like to treadle. I forgot she had it. And a few years back, one of my cousins, she's one that had moved away and lost contact with the family after her dad died. She'd moved out of state. She'd moved back to Tulsa. And she said, would you like to have my grandmother's sewing machine? And she said, my grandmother, I was thinking on her mother's side of the family or something. It never dawned on me because Jency was my great granny. I'm a generation off of her. And I said, yes, and we kind of forgot about it. And then my cousin Paula has, she said, do you want Granny's sewing machine? Because her mother had it, her mother Peggy. And Peggy was going into assisted living. And I said, yes, I'll be in Tulsa tomorrow. So we went to get it. And at that time, Grandpa was still living, and I asked him about it. And I said, do you remember when Granny got this machine? He said, well, I'm sure she bought it brand new, but it was in 1923. And the decals are a little bit faded. Somebody's probably cleaned it with water or something, but they're a little bit silvered. But I'm not going to change. I'm going to leave it just like Granny used to. So
Yeah.
And then I have a little thread rack. After Grandpa passed, my step-aunt brought me.
I told him I
So
went
I have all wooden spools and everything about that.
with her uncle.
So
Kenneth.
and then I bought the hand crank one or converted it so I could do living history with it when there's no electricity.
Oh,
but
I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah.
yeah, so I can't take
So
that
if you put
big.
the treadle on it, you don't have to have electricity.
No, that was the beauty of it. It's just
Yeah.
little machines.
I can't take it with me, so this hand crank is just in a little, it didn't have a base when I bought it, but somebody, once people find out you like vintage sewing machines, they'll start giving them to you. So somebody gave me one that was in a base, so I swapped it out and put the hand crank on it. And it's, they're heavy, but at least I could take it with me.
Yeah.
So yeah, I love vintage sewing machines, so I guess out of the 11 I had, all but 2 are vintage. So that's my other obsession.
Now, don't let us forget, we're gonna take you on a tour.
Oh yeah, I won't let you forget.
Okay.
All right. I'm gonna say goodbye to everybody on Zoom. We had a lot of people participating and we're so glad. It'll be recorded, so I'll upload it to YouTube probably tonight or tomorrow. Bye, Miss McGee, and I can't see the other people's names, but bye, and we'll see you later. All right.
Is that the end?
Thanks. Yeah, Leanne's there too. I think we have 5. All right, I'm gonna let y'all go. Bye, guys.
I don't know if I can get the smaller ones on there.